Welcome to the LSU Sports Insider, brought to you by the journalists at The Advocate, NOLA.com, and the Times-Picayune. Perryn Keys here in your upper left box, joined today by Koki Riley up in the upper right box. Say hello, Koki.
How's it going?
And Wilson Alexander in the bottom box. Say hello, Wilson.
Happy opening day to all who observe. For those who aren't watching, Perryn's wearing a throwback Montreal Expos hat. I don't know if that's in honor of opening day or not, but we're just going to roll with it. Koki is a huge baseball fan. Obviously, it's not opening day for college baseball. We're well past that, but happy opening day to all who celebrate. I should have been wearing Braves gear, but their game got postponed to Friday. So,
what's on, in all seriousness, Wilson, what's on your head? Because I can't tell.
Just a Masters hat. My hair was like a cockatoo this morning, so had to just throw something on.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Should be like an Atlanta Thrashers. It's not opening day for hockey, but should be like an Atlanta Thrashers. You ought to go vintage. If it's not going to be a Braves hat.
I went to exactly one Thrashers game in my life, and I got a stomachache from eating sushi at the arena. So,
but arena sushi evidently worse than gas station sushi. So who would have figured? Let's get this thing on the rails. I'm quite certain that our listeners and viewers did not come in to discuss Expos baseball and ballpark sushi. So let's get to it. A little bit of business, of course, as always. If you're tuning in and you're listening, you know that The Advocate's the number one destination for LSU sports coverage. So please subscribe to The Advocate if you haven't already. Go to theadvocate.com/subscribe. Subscribe to our newsletter. There's a lot going on, as we always say, but it's always true, especially in the spring. Really, basically every single major sport is going in the spring, if you include football, which of course is why Wilson is here. Spring football is going on. We just had pro day. We'll get into that, and then of course baseball. The baseball teams got to get themselves sort of turned around and square and right. Long way to go, but they got a brutal schedule ahead starting this weekend with Arkansas. Stay up to date with everything. Gymnastics, LSU women's basketball, softball, all that's going on as well. So get all your headlines sent to one place, so you don't have to go scrambling all over the internet. Get our LSU newsletter sent straight to your inbox, to your phone, to your desktop. To sign up for it, you go to theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. Of course, we are here on the LSU Sports Insider every Monday and Thursday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever other finer podcasts are found. But perhaps more importantly, we're live on our YouTube channel. The YouTube channel, LSU Tigers on NOLA.com. You can always catch us there live. If you don't catch us there live, you can catch us after the fact on that same YouTube channel. So do a search for LSU Tigers on NOLA.com on YouTube and hit that subscribe button. And that way you will stay up to date on all our episodes. Incidentally, if you are looking for a breakdown of the women's basketball tournament and the big weekend coming up for them, you can check out our previous podcast. And also the first major week of spring football in terms of Wilson being able to glean some observations from what's going on over there at practice. That was 2 episodes ago. So stay up to date and check out all our episodes at our YouTube channel, LSU Tigers on NOLA.com. And of course, we are brought to you today and every day by Champion Wealth Strategies. Champion Wealth Strategies is a national financial services firm specializing in the capital markets, securities, insurance, 401ks, and college and retirement planning. Our broker-dealer is LPL Financial Member FINRA SIPC. As you know, investments are not FDIC insured, may lose value, and have no bank guarantee. But to learn more, to find out about Champion Wealth Strategies, please go to championwealthstrategies.com. So let's start a little bit with baseball first. Koki, if you would. You've seen certainly some promising things from the LSU baseball team for the first 2 weekends, even though they've dropped 2 out of 3 in their first 2 weekends. The first against Mississippi State, the second, of course, against Florida. They get run ruled a couple of times. And so it's interesting. It's interesting, obviously, the situation they find themselves in. And it's not going to get any easier. As we speak here on Thursday, sort of midday Thursday, the Tigers are gearing up for Arkansas and one of the best pitchers in the land, and Hagen Smith. So they will have their hands full to be able to get going. And first things first, Koki, just tell us a little bit about the rotation and how Jay Johnson is approaching this weekend.
Yeah, they're mixing things up a little bit this weekend. Luke Holman will throw on Friday. He won't throw on Thursday, so we won't get the Luke Holman versus Hagen Smith matchup to start the series. And then Gage Jump will start on Saturday. Thursday starter, which is today's starter, still to be determined. So we'll see who gets the ball. And if I had to make a guess, it's probably going to be Griffin Herring. Not 100% sure on that, though. Maybe it's Jayden Coleman. Maybe it's Christian Little. Maybe it's Nate Ackenhausen. All of them have started for LSU at some point in their LSU careers. Ackenhausen and Little last season, Coleman 3 times this year, and Herring once during the non-conference play. So we'll see how it all sort of shakes out. But Herring's been probably their best reliever up to this point, and he'll be rested well enough for this game, and I think they can probably get 3 or 4 innings out of him if they needed to. So it's going to be a little bit more of a collective effort in this first game, I think, regardless. But at the same time, like, I can sort of understand why they're doing this, because it's going to be hard to win this first game against Hagen Smith, because he's been probably the best pitcher in college baseball to start this year.
This is also not the first time, nor will I doubt very seriously it'll be the last time that Jay Johnson says his starting pitcher is TBA in a given time. This is this a little bit of sort of Jay Johnson being Jay Johnson, a little bit of football coach in him, where he's got to have a little palace intrigue going on?
Yeah, I mean, he definitely thinks at least it's an advantage for nobody to know who. For his team that Arkansas doesn't know who they'll be facing, and maybe that could be just another slight edge that he can use heading into a game where he was going to be undermanned in terms of the pitching side either way. So maybe muddy the waters a little bit and see what happens.
I want to bring up two words, a phrase to you, because this stood out. You obviously made note of it in a story at the end of last weekend. It's up at theadvocate.com if you want to catch up. Competitive. Yeah, well, it is. It's a fine website, isn't it? Lots of fine information. Beautiful people running around on that website. The phrase competitive character, which is something that Jay Johnson, he actually used those 2 words together, and what he was getting at with that, and what he didn't see and would like to see as LSU moves forward. And did he see a little bit of it, albeit in a small sample size, against Southeastern for the midweek game?
I don't think he saw it a ton in the Southeastern game, just because LSU was pretty much ahead and they didn't run into a ton of
high stress situations.
Yeah. I totally forgot the word. And so they pretty much control the game throughout, and it's really just a matter when bleep hits the fan, how do you react? And when bleep hit the fan on Sunday, they didn't react very well to it at all. The game really just totally fell apart, and we'll
reset that for our listeners and readers. For those who are just sort of catching up and they just sort of check in on LSU baseball, may not have known how that series finale game. They have a 1-run lead, and then what happens?
Yeah, so they have a 1-run lead, and then Thatcher Hurd gives up 6 runs in the top of the 5th inning. Actually, he didn't give up all 6 runs. We gave up 5 of the 6 runs in that top of the 5th inning, and gives up a 2-run home run with 1 out. And then the big inning 2-out problem sort of started to happen and manifest for him after that. Couldn't get out of the inning, and then Kate Anderson gives up a 2-run home run to score the last inherited runner and add that 6th run to the board. And then after that, it was just an onslaught of Florida home runs, whether it was another one off Anderson, whether it was a couple off Jayden Coleman in 2 innings later, and the offense basically shut down as well, with the exception of a Jared Jones home run. And before you know it, it was a 12-2 run rolled game. And given how south things went and how quickly they went, and I haven't even mentioned the fact that Jay Johnson got ejected during this entire
That's true. Yeah.
foray as well, and that was the first time he's been ejected at LSU. Given how quickly things just sort of fell apart for them, it made sense that he went to it made sense how disappointed he was in the competitive character and the lack of resilience they had in that game.
So what would you like to see? Well, before we get into to Arkansas, get more into Arkansas here just in a little bit, you did want to bring up a certain somebody who has flashed and did flash this past weekend. A young man by the name of Ethan Frey, who did well, right-handed hitter, particularly against lefties, which is not a surprise, righty-lefty, but he particularly stood out.
Yeah, this has been a trend with Ethan so far this season. If you remember the first time they played Southeastern this season in Hammond, when they came back from a 3-1 deficit with 2 outs in the ninth inning, Frey came in the pinch hit, and it was against a left-handed hitter, and he had a double, and it kept the inning going, and they ended up winning the game. And then in the Xavier game where he ended up getting hurt, he started, and it was against a left-handed pitcher. And then when he came back from injury this past weekend, he started 2 of the 3 games against Florida, and Florida has 2 left-handed pitchers, starting in their rotation, and Cade Fisher and Jack Caglione. He starts both those games. He gets 1 hit against Caglione, and he gets 2 hits against Cade Fisher. So you're kind of seeing a trend here, and you're not only seeing a trend here in terms of who he's starting against and when he's producing. So I think Frey has become definitely like a very dangerous option for them against left-handed pitching. And I'm not saying he's, terrible against right-handed pitching. He'll never play against right-handed pitching, but they had him lead off during the midweek game against Southeastern, this past week. And it was against a righty, and he didn't get a hit. I just feel like that's notable, worth noting, I should say. And so yeah, I think he's definitely a weapon for them against left-handed pitching, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if he started in this game against Hagen Smith tonight.
Ethan Frey on the season, not just versus left-handers, but his overall stats. He's played in 13 of the 26 games LSU has played, hitting .321 and 28 at-bats. Somebody who is not hitting for quite the average, but has certainly made his mark, certainly left a mark on several baseballs as of late. Jared Jones hitting .289. He's already got 10 home runs on the year. He's certainly made his presence felt lately.
Yeah, Jared's really improved his plate discipline and his ability to sort of lay off of those breaking balls that he was chasing at. Really, even in the beginning of this season, I think right now he leads the team in walks. I think that's where you really see that patient approach. And when he's swinging the bat, he's hitting the ball hard. Sometimes it's right at guys, sometimes it's right at outfielders, but sometimes it's going over the fence as well. At least the team in home runs with 10. So I guess that patient approach, that ability to maximize his contact, he's done a really, really good job of that over the last few weeks in particular. So I think at the very beginning of the year, I said that Brady Neal, Jared Jones, and Paxton Kling, like their progress was going to be like huge for this offense and going to be sort of the key to unlocking the rest of the offense. So far, they have one of the 3 guys who have certainly proven that they've done that so far this year in Jared. So it's whether you can get those other 2 guys up to speed, particularly against conference play. That's going to be a real key for them moving forward.
So moving forward, as we stand here today, before the Thursday night opener at Alec Box, LSU, of course, is 2-4 in conference play. They're 2-4 in conference play, and they've got a good bit of the. Not that the SEC is ever an easy trip, no matter where you go, but they've got Vanderbilt coming up next week, followed by Tennessee, and then they go to Missouri. And Missouri, of course, out of those 3 upcoming opponents, is probably at least on paper, the weakest of these opponents. And of course, Arkansas, number 1 team in the nation, and Hagen Smith, who they've faced before, of course, and Dave Van Horn's been doing it a long time. Hagen Smith this year, though, 4-0, 1.24 ERA. We're talking about 62 strikeouts against 10 walks. This is going to be a difficult assignment. I don't care who you are. Just tell us what you're expecting to see out of Hagen Smith, what fans should expect to see out of Hagen Smith, and how LSU is going to try to combat these guys.
Yeah, with Hagen Smith, expect to see, one of, if not the best pitchers in college baseball. You're expecting a guy who could potentially be a top 10 pick in this upcoming year's draft. I'm not saying he is Paul Skeens, but he's this year's Paul Skeens. I guess That's the best way to put it. And I think it does make sense for, LSU to sort of save their bullets for the latter half of the series, even though I do think Maason Molina and Brady Tygart aren't that much worse than Hagen Smith. I mean, Arkansas's rotation has just been the best rotation in college baseball so far this season. Their offense, I think I think they can limit their offense. Maybe not. I like Arkansas's offense isn't, a weakness compared to, most teams to like most teams, but at the same time, I wouldn't call it like the team strength necessarily. It's a very old team, a lot of transfers. Kendall Diggs is a name who's been there for a while and a very productive player, but it's something that I think LSU starters at least can handle. Whether the bullpen can handle them may, determine whether this team wins 2 games or 1 game or none this weekend. So that's certainly something to look out for as we move ahead into this weekend.
So you mentioned the bullpen and the bullpen having difficulties. We've discussed over and over and over again, as all our listeners and viewers know, that this LSU baseball team was always going to be a little bit of a flip in terms of its identity compared to last year, where it's going to be, it is supposed to be reliant on its pitching staff, which appears to be very strong in the rotation and appears to be very deep and talented coming out of the bullpen with lots of options. But frankly, lately the bullpen has struggled. Thatcher Hurd certainly ran into some trouble as a starting pitcher in the series finale against Florida. Couldn't get out of the inning. Bullpen comes in, does not do a whole lot better. What's going on with the bullpen, Koki? That's a short question with a long answer. But what do you suspect is going on with the bullpen? Is this just one of these things that happens in baseball? You go through a really, you're going through it. You're going through a rough patch, and so many of them are going through it at the same time. What's sort of the remedy for these guys and how they sort of get back right? More toward, where they were at the beginning of the season, albeit against weaker competition and non-conference. What do they do?
I think what we've seen with the starting rotation and sort of mixing it up a little bit, maybe even having Thatcher Hurd as a reliever, I think that might be one path that they may be going down. Because if you look at next week too, that sort of sets them up to where they play a Thursday to Saturday series next weekend as well. So I don't know how Thatcher's going to slide in there if that's going to be the case, unless they have him they just like sit him throughout this week, or maybe have him just come out of relief once and then start on next Thursday, maybe. But maybe that's one way. That's one as avenue of a solution there. But then again, either way, you're plucking somebody out of that bullpen and then starting them on Thursday, right? This Thursday. So I think Griffin Herring's been a strength for them, but really with everyone else, I can at least pick some nits and sort of, find some holes, whether it's in their game or their approaches or the way Jay Johnson handled them. I mean, Nate Ackenhausen, I think on Saturday in that huge game, that really determined whether LSU would be 2-4 in SEC play or 3-3 in SEC play. On Saturday, they were the better team through 6 or 7 innings. They had a 2-run lead. Yep. Then the 8th inning, there was a drop third strike with runners in the corners and 2 outs. And the Cade Curlin, he reached base on the drop third strike, and that would have ended the inning. And Ackenhouse had to get 4 outs in that inning, and runs scored because of it. And that was massive because in the next inning, Ackenhausen walks the leadoff batter, and Florida scores with 2 outs in that 9th inning to send the game to extra innings. It was absolutely crushing for the fans in attendance, everybody. I mean, it was the second highest paid attendance in LSU baseball history in that game. It was a raucous environment, and they just couldn't quite slam the door on Florida. And that was really crushing for them. And it leaked into Sunday, of course, because of all the stuff that happened to them on that Sunday. So, I think a lot of fans would argue that they shouldn't have let Ackenhausen, throw the 10th and 11th innings of that game, just because it was going to be hard for him to get through Florida's lineup once, let alone twice. Right. And he faced Caglione a second time. And when he faced him a second time, Caglione hit a ball. Him pay. Yes, exactly. Hit a ball over the wall, and 2-run home run, which ended up deciding the game. So, so you could point to maybe some of the bullpen management. You can point to, just guys underperforming. Last weekend against Mississippi State, they walked a lot of guys. I think they walked 10 guys in 11 and the third innings or something like that, which is just kind of unacceptable. They gave up a ton of home runs, 5 to be exact. The bullpen did against Florida on Sunday alone. That's just far too many. And I think that's what kind of helped inflate their ERA to even higher lengths, because on the Friday against the Gators, they threw pretty well because it was just one guy. It was Griffin Herring, 3 innings, 3 shutout innings. Gavin Guidry had a solid start, not perfect because he gave up the leadoff double, which became the run that cut the lead to 1 in that Saturday game. But for the most part, he's been pretty solid for them. And then we talked about Nate extensively, but then after that, it just was a lot of guys that I don't know how much confidence LSU fans have in them right now. And those guys have to pitch better, whether it's throwing strikes or limiting home runs. Sundays, there's going to be more runs scored. Like, part of this is on the offense as well.
No matter who you're talking about. Sunday,
exactly. Yeah. Like, Sundays are the days where you're supposed to score runs, and they haven't done that at all on both Sundays. So it's not maybe all in the bullpen. And it's not maybe all in those guys, because again, I mentioned the Jay Johnson, how he's handled those guys. So I have a big story on just sort of breaking down everything that's sort of gone on with this bullpen. That's probably up on the Advocate right now. But I think just to distill it all and like the bottom line of it all is they have to pitch better. And right now I think they have a 10.5 ERA in 23 innings. The bullpen against SEC competition, that's just not going to do it. Even if you do include some of the mismanagement and some of the bad luck, whether it's the Ackenhausen play or some batted ball luck, right? But at the same time, like, it's just got to improve, because this team's built off their pitching, as we mentioned earlier. The offense is going to be up and down throughout the rest of the season, really. So the pitching was going to be the stabling force, and right now it hasn't been a stabling force at the back end.
Before we move on to spring football and pro day, one last thing about baseball that we probably ought to talk about a little bit, at least. Speaking of tinkering, some tinkering continues in the outfield. Paxton Kling starts in center. The first and the last game of the Florida series, he was on the bench on Saturday, came off the bench. Brady Neal starts in right field in the last game of the series. That puts Josh Pearson at second base, if I'm not mistaken. And then Jake Brown was in center field in the middle game. Jake Brown obviously doing a job at the plate. Meanwhile, Mac Bingham, he does okay. Had a couple of hits on Friday. He had a homer on Saturday. And Pearson did pretty well himself. This is still, this is all a continuation of the mixing and matching that Jay Johnson's been doing in the outfield. And maybe we'll see this all season, but maybe he will find a combination that he really likes. Just give us your 2 cents on what's going on there in the outfield, Koki.
Yeah, I think Paxton's struggles at the plate have sort of opened up and have sort of continued the third outfielder roulette that they've been having lately. I think Josh Pearson and Mac Bingham have pretty much established themselves as everyday guys, whether it's in the outfield or not. And then Stephen Milam's been kind of thrown into this mix as well, because he's had trouble hitting against conference pitching, SEC pitching. So sometimes they'll move him back. They moved him back to second base on Sunday, for example. So I mean, technically it's a second base and outfield roulette a little bit,
right? But
really it's a third outfielder, roulette. So we'll see. Jake Brown is in that mix. Maybe if Ethan Frey can rehab his shoulder enough, because I didn't even mention this in the Ethan Frey portion, but he's been playing with a bad shoulder. So maybe he can get in there a little bit. I mean, Ashton Larson, if the matchups sort of help him out a little bit more on that, because he's a left-handed hitter and they can face a couple more righties, then maybe he's an option. So yeah, like, they have a bunch of different guys that are sort of vying for an outfield spot, and whether it's Bingham in center and then they move one of the guys to the corners, or Brady Neal to right field and Josh Pearson to left, or something along those lines. That's something that they've done quite a bit as well, putting Brady Neal in the outfield. So it all depends on the matchup, really. I don't think, Johnson's sitting a guy unless it's, the Kling situation because he's struggling at the plate so much. I don't think he's sitting a guy because, he's out of favor, right? I think it's because of matchup.
Right.
It's always about the matchups with him. That's what you have to remember. It's why they don't really have a set bullpen. It's why they don't really have a set lineup. And sometimes it's not even why they have a set rotation. So that's something definitely to keep in mind as we head into this series. And it's why I kind of think Frey might get some even more playing time against an Arkansas team that, of course, is Hagen Smith and a few other pretty good lefties.
This is the LSU Sports Insider, brought to you by the journalists at The Advocate, NOLA.com, and the Times-Picayune. You know where to find all these fine gentlemen's fine work. That's at theadvocate.com. It's a great website, as Wilson alluded to earlier before. So you go there for the time of your life, and you certainly go there for the best LSU sports coverage of anybody around. And so if you don't subscribe already, please do support your local journalists. The Advocate's always been known as the number one destination. We cover LSU wall to wall. And so, don't miss a moment. Get all the news and the latest headlines sent straight to your inbox, to your phone, to your desktop with the LSU newsletter. Scott Rabelais handles that 3 times a week, but it's a daily newsletter sent straight to your email. And so you can sign up for that, and you won't miss a moment there either. You won't miss all the headlines, all the latest. Sign up at theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. We are here every Monday and Thursday on the LSU Sports Insider. On Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever other finer podcasts are found. And of course, perhaps more importantly, we are, whether we're in the studio or doing this virtually as we are today, we are here every Monday and Thursday on our YouTube channel, LSU Tigers on NOLA.com. If you go onto YouTube and search LSU Tigers on NOLA.com, you should be able to find us, and you will be able to find us there live whenever we go live on Mondays and Thursdays. If you don't catch us there live, you can catch us on that same YouTube channel after the fact, so please sign up for that as well. And of course, we are brought to you every Monday and Thursday by Champion Wealth Strategies. To learn more about those fine folks, go to championwealthstrategies.com and plan like a champion today. So speaking of champions, or certainly people who have performed like champions lately, let's talk a little bit about Malik Nabers.
I thought you were going to say me, but okay.
Well, I don't know. How'd you play? How was your golf game lately?
It's gotten better. But yes, Malik Nabers had a fantastic pro day. I think that's
a little birdie says
before I cut you off there.
No, a little birdie says your short game is not champion level.
Rab's ratting me out over there. I see how it is. We're working on it. It's gotten better.
That's good.
We're working on it. But Malik, yes, that pro day, to get back on track here, he really shined. Going into this, it was already pretty obvious that Malik is going to be a top 10 pick. If he fell out of that, it would be shocking come draft night. Really, I think probably maybe a top 6 pick. And he, I think, solidified that with what he did at pro day. A 42-inch vertical jump, a 10-foot 9-inch broad jump, and a 4.35 40-yard dash. And then, of course, did everything that you expect of Malik during the throwing session as well. Crisp routes, varied routes. Brian Kelly said, just validated what you see on film, and his ability to separate from other players, from corners and DBs when he's running his routes, and then his ability to pick up yards after the catch. All of it goes back to his explosiveness, and just really shows that in those numbers how explosive of a player he is. You see comments from NFL draft analysts who have done this for a long time, calling him the most explosive player in this draft class potentially. That view is certainly out there.
I just wanted to say something right quick, Wilson. I want to put you guys on the hot seat. Do you guys know what the average vertical jump is, or what's sort of considered the median vertical jump is for an NBA player?
Oh, my gosh. I do not know. I'm going to go with 33 inches.
Koki?
37, 38.
The average vertical jump or the mean vertical jump for an NBA player is 28 inches. You want to give Malik Nabers his number again one more time?
42, which would have been I think it would have been the second highest tied for second highest at the combine. There was a few guys who hit 42.5 inches. But this is also coming from somebody who's 6 feet, like pretty much 6 feet flat. And he can really get up there. It reminds me of a story that one of his former high school coaches told me about how he was as a basketball player. Malik could just dunk flat-footed. I mean, he's just gets so much leap out of his lower body and so much explosiveness. That's the word that I keep coming back to with him, that a lot of people see with him when you evaluate his game. You could really tell in his yards after the catch last year how much he's able to pick up once he has the ball in his hands. And, he hadn't tested at the combine. He hadn't been measured at the combine. He really waited to do everything at pro day, and he took full advantage of it.
So, Perryn, you're telling me he should be in the dunk contest? Is that what you're telling me?
If he wants to be, they could sign him up like Matt McClung. I mean,
they could do a fantastic dunk contest with like LSU's football players. Would it compare to like what you would get out of LSU's basketball team? No, probably not. But you talk like especially from some names that come to mind, like Trades Green. If you got him involved once he got on campus,
yeah.
I mean, 6'7", tight end with a basketball background. Brian Thomas was a basketball player pretty much his entire life. Can jump over the rim. Malik as well. I think you could get some interesting results. They probably, would they do it necessarily? Maybe not.
I don't think their agents are going to be too keen on it before draft. I'll tell you that.
Exactly.
I mean, it has to be better than
a fantastic site.
It has to be better than the NBA slam dunk contest. That's all I got to say. So
it would. Well, I think it would be more entertaining, frankly.
Exactly. Yeah, it's got to be better than that. So,
but it is
the bar's low.
in all seriousness, it is just a reminder just how insanely good these guys are, and how insanely good elite. Not to get too far sidetracked, but how insane elite athletes truly are. We mentioned golf, which we never mentioned on the show, really. But and Wilson, we're talking about your game. And the thing that really brings it into focus of me, just about how good the very best in anything are, is you remember it used to be called the Tight Lies Tour, but now it's called the Adams Tour. This is very, very, very it would be sort of like low A if you were going to use minor leagues as an example. And they used to come through here and play the University Club and do a weekend event. And these guys would shoot something like, the winner would be something like 35 under or something like that, for that, just tearing up this course. And these are guys who are never, ever going to sniff the PGA Tour. I mean, these are the best of the best of the best of the best. So just find that, it's a reminder of just how good the elite athletes are anywhere you go and whatever you see. Let's move on to Brian Thomas. Speaking of elite, he had a nice little 40 time that he turned in, didn't he?
Well, yeah, that was at the combine. He had the 4.33.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, you're right.
At all yesterday. Somebody asked him afterwards why he didn't work out, and he goes, "I did everything at the combine." It's like, yeah, he stood on his combine numbers, because why wouldn't you when you test the way he did? He was one of the most impressive receivers and overall players at the combine about a month ago. And so, he participated in the throwing session with Jayden, Malik, and some of LSU's other current receivers too. Had actually one of the highlights of the day. It was kind of subtle during the throwing session. If you don't have a keen eye for it, that all kind of starts to blend together in some ways. But Brian had this great vertical route down the field where he brought in a long deep throw from Jayden down the right sideline with his fingertips. That really caught the eye of some evaluators, and just further emphasized that he is a top 15 pick most likely. Maybe he gets up to as high as 12. Would he drop past 15? It's possible, depending on how the draft shakes out, but he's certainly in that range. He's going to be a first-round pick. He brings so much to the table, not just as a vertical player, but he was showing some different routes yesterday that emphasize that he can do a little bit more than just be that. That certainly seems to be the strength of his game. But, after what he did at Pro Day, in terms of, like I said, in the throwing session, on top of his combine and all the film that he had last year, he solidified himself, just like Malik did, as one of the top players in this class. So certainly from the wide receiver position.
Yeah, it seems like it's Marvin Harrison Jr., Rome Odunze, and Malik Nabers is kind of like a tier top three, and then it's Brian. I mean, that's what it sort of seems like at the moment.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that. And right now, it's whether or not Malik is one or two. Maybe some other teams have Rome at two. It all is in the eye of the beholder. But there appears to be momentum that Malik could even be the first receiver off the board. It seems almost like unfathomable, because there's been just so much hype around Marvin Harrison Jr. for over a year, and deservedly so. Marvin Harrison is a fantastic player. We got into this a lot when we were talking about the Biletnikoff Award last season. This isn't really to take away from either one of them, but you again see from draft analysts, folks who really cover the draft closely, that there's some teams that have Malik Nabers as their number one wide receiver. And there's even some that have him, according to Dane Brugler of The Athletic, as their like top prospect on the entire draft. And so, Malik, I think there was a lot of the conversation coming off yesterday is, can he be wide receiver one? He's certainly in that mix. I mean, he had a fantastic year last year, back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, Blitnikoff finalist, and everything that we saw at Pro Day just further back that up. That I agree with you. He's certainly in that top tier, along with Marvin and with Rome. But it feels like it's probably even a tier that's maybe just Marvin and Malik. And can Malik jump Marvin Harrison and be the first receiver off the board? We'll have to see. He talked about that just a little bit yesterday, that in his mind, he's wide receiver one, even if he gets drafted at 19. That's just kind of the mentality that he has and that he's going to maintain throughout his career. To really speak to Malik's mindset, he said that he woke up at 5 a.m. yesterday, not because he had set an alarm, but because he was anxious and it's sort of anticipating running the 40. It was something he hadn't officially done since high school. His legs were even shaking a little bit as he was kind of waking up in anticipation for that event. He said that he ran it a second time after having hit 4.35 unofficially because he had seen somewhere in the media, didn't say where this came from, I don't know who said this, that he was a 4.5 or 4.6 guy. And he wanted to prove that and showcase that what he really is in that guy who's a 4.3 to 4.4. And again, no clue where that came from. Might just be one of those kind of athletes who manufactures chips on their shoulder, because that was a phrase that he used quite a bit yesterday, was having a chip on his shoulder. He wants to prove that he's the best wide receiver out there. That's certainly how he views himself.
There was that quote was making the rounds on social media as, the classic manufactured chip on the shoulder sort of, comment, the Michael Jordan thing where he's just coming up with, reasons out of thin air to be motivated on a single day, right? Like it's a very similar thing. And it's kind of funny to look at from the outside, but it's also very smart for any athlete, and especially for a guy like Malik to sort of do that with himself.
It seems to be effective for that certain type of, that athlete with that certain type of personality. For what it's worth, CBS Sports, the latest mock, has Malik Nabers going 6th, as does Mel Kiper of ESPN. The lowest I can find anywhere is him going 9th, which does bring into question, where do we think that number 5 might go? Jayden Daniels, he obviously threw passes yesterday wearing a very specific sweatshirt, which I thought was a nice touch. Incidentally, but we see other quarterbacks who and look, this happens every year, all the way across the board, across every position and all that. But certainly quarterbacks who frankly did not accomplish as much last year or in their college careers as Jayden Daniels did. Where does he stand now? What do we think about all this? Wilson, go ahead.
Jayden, only threw yesterday. There was really no reason for him to test. As much as we would have loved to have seen Jayden run the 40 just to know what the time is. This is a guy who verified 21 plus miles an hour in multiple games last year. So
another guy who could just point to the tape and say, I've put enough on film. You guys go ahead and take a look at that. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Exactly. He still took measurements. That was something that he and Malik had not done at the combine. So teams got his height, weight, hand size, arm length, etc. A quick note about Malik, speaking of hand size, 9 7/8, which is the same as Brian Thomas, even though Brian Thomas is 3 inches taller. Malik wears 4XL gloves. It's just wild. His hands are absolutely massive, especially for a guy 6 feet tall. But back to Jayden. He just did the throwing session, like I said, and he missed some throws here and there, overthrew his receivers a couple times. It really seemed to settle in, though, toward the end, hit some impressive deep balls, one in particular to Chris Hilton as the media was kind of walking out toward the interview room. That was like a 65-yard kind of throw, and it emphasized how effective he was throwing the deep ball last year. That throw day, the throwing session probably isn't going to dictate exactly what teams do at the top of the draft unless it's absolutely abysmal or overly impressive. Jayden, really, you just point to his film last year, like you said, and what he did want to do yesterday, though, was show a few different things that we didn't see from his senior year at LSU. He took a few plays under center, which is something that LSU never did, and did, fake handoffs, play action. Again, not something that LSU did from under center last year with him at all. And then he also wanted to do some off-platform stuff, which we saw a little bit from him. But that was kind of the main focus of his throwing session, which had been designed by his personal quarterbacks coach, Taylor Kelly, out there at 3DQB, who was running that for him yesterday. And he wanted to show that regardless of kind of whether he was in the pocket or throwing off platform, that he could get his feet back underneath him and kind of show his footwork. And so he thought he accomplished that. And Jayden is still coming out of that pro day. You know, he did most likely either the second or the third pick of the draft. There's a very strong chance that he ends up going number 2 to the Washington Commanders. Washington Commanders coach Dan Quinn was standing right behind Jayden throughout his throwing session. The Commanders had a strong contingent there, as did the Patriots at number 3. Their senior offensive analyst, Ben McAdoo, was standing right behind Jayden. And even the Vikings quarterbacks coach, Josh McCown, the Vikings are another quarterback-needy team, that he was standing right behind him. Antonio Pierce, who Jayden has known for a long time, actually coached him at Arizona State, head coach of the Raiders now. He was there, as was the head coach of the Saints, Dennis Allen, and the head coach of the, it is suddenly escaping me, Bears was there too. And it looks like the Bears are going to draft Caleb Williams, but you know, they still had some people there checking out Jayden as they do the rest of their homework. Jayden is in that upper echelon of players this year. He's probably going to go second or third, and it just depends on how things shake out a month from now in Cleveland.
I think the Patriots and the Commanders had their entire brass there. Head coach, GM, head of pro scouting, all the way down. And I think they're all going to make their way to North Carolina, or they've made their way to North Carolina already for today for Drake May's pro day. So it all just makes sense.
And another thing to add to it was reportedly Jayden hadn't really started his meetings at all. And that really kind of started here around pro day. And so that might have even been more important to some of these teams than just watching him throw on air, because then they could actually get in rooms with him. Certainly I would imagine some of that happened at the combine, but more of an individual thing, further evaluation in this process, just getting to sit down and talk with him. That was happening around pro day as well. And that was a big reason for teams to come down too.
Elsewhere, there obviously these two folks who we were talking about were far from the only ones who were participating in pro day. So many of these you saw. Louis Riddick was among many personalities who just sort of made broad general statements about like the talent level is incredible here at LSU. And so that in and of itself is not a surprise, but I did want to, because you had a story that's up today, or has been up for a couple of days now at theadvocate.com about somebody who was something of a curious entry into the NFL draft, and that's Maason Smith. You had a chance to be able to talk to him. Probably a projected maybe second day, or excuse me, mid round, third or fourth round type of guy, but certainly was as coveted a prospect as there's been over the last several years in the state of Louisiana. He was able to just sort of discuss why he made the decision he did, and tell us about how well he did, and what the prospects are for him moving forward.
Well, Maason, I didn't get to speak with him directly. He spoke at the combine last month, so I do want to make that distinction.
I apologize,
because
that's my mistake.
He said at the combine how he left LSU early, in large part because of the uncertainty around who was going to be the next defensive line coach. He had played under a different defensive line coach every single season at LSU, and there was still that uncertainty when he was making his decision to declare. Pete Jenkins, who I did get the chance to speak to, as LSU's defensive line coach last year, kind of stepped in mid-season and was in communication with Maason Smith during this process, even encouraged him to come back to LSU. But Pete, said how he couldn't guarantee who the next defensive line coach was going to be. LSU was obviously at that time pursuing Bo Davis, but Bo Davis had not taken the job yet. Maason ends up going ahead and announcing that he's going to enter the NFL draft on January 9th. That's one day before LSU hires Bo Davis, but it was also 6 days before the underclassmen draft declaration deadline. And that's the reason I wanted to say, really specify that I didn't get to speak to Maason personally, because there were still some questions about, well, why not just wait a little bit longer if you had the choice to? Pete said that in his gut, he just kind of felt like Maason was going to go. Clearly the feedback that he got was good enough for him to feel comfortable doing so at this time. And he's still now a very intriguing prospect for a lot of NFL teams, because this is a guy who's still 6'6", 305 to 10 pounds and athletic, and the five-star prospect who signed with LSU a few years ago. Maason didn't really quite meet those expectations during his career. Part of it was the ACL injury that he couldn't control. It seemed like going into that 2022 season, he had the chance to be really, truly dominant. LSU was having trouble blocking him throughout preseason camp. But he didn't, coming off that ACL for the first year, he didn't quite have the season that anyone thought he might. He didn't, rise back up to that round one buzz that he was getting. But he did still feel like in his own mind that near the end of the season, he was starting to play a lot better. And he wanted to kind of build on that going now into the draft. And so Maason yesterday, you saw him and Mekhi Wingo and Jordan Jefferson all working out. None of his numbers necessarily like popped out at you or anything like that. So I'm not sure necessarily what his pro day did or did not do for his stock. Whereas I think for like Mekhi Wingo, it probably continued to help. His get off is so impressive. His just short burst of quickness, which you can see on film, was evident again at pro day, just like it was at times at the combine. Jordan Jefferson, you got a sense of his strength and even some of his athleticism and speed. Maason didn't necessarily stand out in those ways, but I think still probably impressed teams because of his size and the way that he is able to move still as a 6'6", like we said, defensive lineman. And so, that's kind of where Maason is at right now, is probably still a maybe late day 2 pick, maybe somewhere on day 3. It kind of depends on if a team thinks that it can really get more out of him, right. Because there is still seems like there's a lot of potential within Maason Smith, but he himself needs to be able to unlock it. And he probably needs the consistent coaching to help unlock it as well. Part of the reason that he left LSU, he said, was because of that uncertainty around another defensive line coach hire that had not been made at the time of his announcement. Maybe as he goes into the NFL, he can find some coaching, a little bit more stability in that regard, and maybe that'll help him unlock his talent too.
And you mentioned, it's not like this year's defensive line class is the greatest defensive line class of all time. So I think because of that and because of his background as a 5-star recruit, and there's not a lot of, 5-star recruits there's not 100 of them out there in the draft, right? So because of those sort of accolades and, the second year coming off an ACL is usually when a player gets their full explosiveness back. Combine all those factors sort of together, and maybe he gets drafted higher than some people expect him to.
You mentioned Mekhi Wingo, his departure, obviously, and the departure of Maason Smith. Those were the 2 departures that left a big, huge hole at defensive tackle. Incidentally, nobody's, in addition to the explosiveness that Mekhi showed on pro day, nobody's going to question his motor because this is as we saw for 2 years, he barely came off the field the first year. He came off the field a little bit more often last year, but certainly nobody's going to question his motor or his level of production. So good on him. That does leave a hole on the defensive line. And we have always suspected that this offseason that would be LSU's priority number 1 would be to find somebody in the transfer portal. They have found a defensive lineman, maybe not the splashiest pickup, but tell us a little about Wilson, about Wisconsin defensive end Gio Paez, who committed to LSU just the other day.
Gio was, like you said, listed as a defensive end at Wisconsin, but this is somebody who is over 300 pounds and is going to be a defensive tackle at LSU. He is, the first transfer pickup that they have on the defensive line. He said the other day that he couldn't remember exactly that he entered the portal because as a graduate transfer, it's a little bit different. He can kind of do it whenever. It's not necessarily within those portal windows that we talk about a lot nowadays in college football. But pretty much as soon as he did, Bo Davis reached out. So certainly, after LSU had hired Bo Davis, LSU is in the market for at least 1 defensive tackle. I would be surprised if it's not at least 1 more, maybe even 2 come the spring portal window, depending on how the roster shakes out, who enters, all those sorts of things. The spring portal window could be absolutely chaotic here in April, at least much more so than it has been in the past. And so maybe there'll be opportunities to find some of those top defensive interior linemen for LSU. But for now, Gio Paez, a guy who's going to be in his 6th year of college football. He didn't really play a whole lot for Wisconsin until the last couple of seasons. But last year he played in 13 games with 6 starts, and he made, I think, a career high around 23 tackles. Also had a couple of quarterback hurries. This is someone who, Bo Davis clearly believes in. The staff clearly believes in. This is a guy who's coming in on scholarship. It's not like he's preferred walk-on or anything. This is one of the, as they're making, additions to this defensive line, this is someone who is important in this whole equation. Like you said, maybe didn't make the splash, but it certainly matters as we talk about the defensive line moving forward. As a 6-year senior, he's going to have a chance to come in and compete, and we'll see what he's able to do come preseason camp. It's not like he's going to come here in the middle of spring ball. It won't be a mid-semester edition or anything like that. So when preseason camp rolls around, we'll get a better sense of how he fits into the equation, but he's definitely going to be expected to be a piece of what LSU is doing next season when you bring in a guy who's got one more year of eligibility.
So we've discussed LSU football for about 20 minutes. We've actually not hit on spring practice itself. So we're about halfway through, a little bit past the halfway point now of spring ball. They're going to take a break here for a week because of the holiday, obviously, and school is out.
Well, really just the long weekend, yeah.
Okay, all right. But well, if you would walk us through the next 3 or 4 practices.
They practiced on Thursday. That was closed to the media. They'll practice again on Tuesday. They just don't practice over the weekend for Easter, give the guys off for that holiday. And then it will be a couple of practices in short succession from there through the spring game on April 13th. So they'll practice next Tuesday, next Thursday, next Saturday, and then a couple times a week after that, heading into the spring game there in Tiger Stadium.
So observations from spring practice. There have been changes in the secondary. It looks as though certainly last weekend you had a chance to take a good long look. And tell us, first of all, tell us where the secondary stands with Sage Ryan not only moving around, but now also you've got Jordan Gilbert and whoever else is coming in. So just reset some of that, if you would, to the extent that it's going to be reset at this point.
Yeah, I'll hit on this quick and. The big change is that Major Burns, who'd been a deep safety the last couple of seasons, is playing what's called the star position. The star position is more of a hybrid defensive back, has some almost like outside linebacker responsibilities and certain looks that's become, now in modern football, it makes sense for a defensive back to handle some of these things. And Major is now playing much closer to the football, almost in the box at times and down near the line of scrimmage. And the change with him moving down there is now you've got an open spot at safety next to Jordan Gilbert, who is the transfer from Texas A&M. He's been a first-team safety from the moment he stepped on campus. He'll be a starter in the fall as long as he stays healthy. Is now that Sage Ryan is back at kind of a natural position for him. LSU has been moving him around a lot, during his career. But safety was always kind of his natural position. He gets to go back to that. We saw him have 3 interceptions on Saturday. To add some context to them, because they were all off of Garrett Nussmeier, and some people are like, oh gosh, what does that mean for Nussmeier? One of them was they kept having Garrett throw directly into the wind. The offense was moving directly in that direction, and really stiff wind on Saturday. And so he threw a deep ball to Chris Hilton, who split the safety in the corner. And it just it seemed like the wind maybe affected that a little bit. Sage was able to catch back up to the ball and come down with a pick. On the second one, it was kind of in like a 2-minute situational period. Where LSU's offense is probably running the same plays quite a bit, but credit to Sage, he read what was coming and picked it off for sort of what was somewhat of a pick six. And then the third interception was off of a tip. Jacobian Guillory at the line of scrimmage, and Sage made the most of it. So that's kind of what you got dealing with at safety. In particular, the real difference is that move with the move that Major Burns made into that star position, now closer to the line of scrimmage. And Sage now shifting over to the other safety spot next to Jordan. Corner is still a complete competition. I mean, I think it's just too early to really name any sort of leaders in the clubhouse. That being said, what we have seen thus far is JV and Toviano and Ashton Stamps have kind of consistently been with the first team defense. Makes sense, as those are guys who started near the end of last year, have been in the program. You've still got J.K. Johnson appears limited. Zy Alexander is coming off an ACL, and Jair Brown is just now transferring in, as well as P.J. Woodland, an early enrollee. All those guys are still kind of they haven't overtaken JV or Ashton, but there's going to be quite a bit of competition all the way throughout the rest of the spring and into the preseason too.
Tell us about the wide receiver position. This is, again, going to be a position that's not going to be settled and set and straight leaving spring, but certainly players like Kyren Lacy can do a lot to help themselves. Chris Hilton as well, some of the other, and of course some of the other youngsters.
Kyren Lacy and Chris Hilton have been the two risers at that receiver position here throughout the first half of spring football. Brian Kelly said of Kyren Lacy that he was the third guy last year within that room, and now he's the man, and he's sort of approaching everything like that, handling himself in that way. that, Garrett Nussmeier complimented what he's done so far this camp a couple of weeks ago, and saying some of the social media clips that LSU has shared is pretty representative of what Kyren has done. And the bits of practice that we've seen, that absolutely looks correct. There was probably one of the highlights of practice last Saturday was that Garrett threw a deep ball to Kyren. Again, it looked like it just maybe got held up in the wind a little bit, and Kyren snatched the ball pretty much off of Jayden Gilbert's helmet, and then just kind of trotted into the end zone. It was a fantastic catch, and this is a guy who looks like he is really – I mean, he's going to be a starter on this team, I believe, and he looks like he might be able to now take that next step too, which that's the thing. It's, Kyren was a starter last year. Now he needs to just be more consistent. And Brian Kelly said that he has been so, certainly in his approach to practice, which is a big thing for him. And then Chris has been able to be a lot more consistent too. That's another, again, the kind of the main word with him, not some of the drops that he'd had, and really just in his approach to what he's doing. He's got a lot more confidence out there. He said that he's done some work with one of LSU staff members on just feeling more confident. And really, part of that was the first half of his career, he was pretty much injured all the time. He's healthy again, has been for a while. And now, but it's really showing up, that he's now going into his fourth year on campus. LSU signed CJ Daniels and Xavier Thomas as kind of those replacements for Malik and for Brian, especially in terms of their experience. But Chris has been, along with Kyren, one of those first-team receivers throughout the first half of spring practice here. I'm sure that, CJ Daniels and Xavier Thomas are going to be in the mix. But so far they've been on the second-team offense, and Chris has held down a spot there, along with Kyren, and those have kind of been, two of the players who have stood out so far.
Would be an enormous boon to LSU. You're not going to replace Nabers and Thomas one for one. It would obviously be an enormous boon for LSU if Kyren, Lacy, and Chris Hilton were continuing to make great steps, in addition to the additions of Xavier Thomas and CJ Daniels, as you said. Of course, everybody wants to ask about, and we'll wrap it up here with just a couple of more, but everybody wants to ask about Harold Perkins. How's he doing?
It's hard to tell, honestly. It's just too early. I mean, all we've seen thus far is Blake Baker working with him on inside linebacker technique. At this point, we've gotten one full practice and 3 20-minute openings to practice. We also haven't gotten the chance to talk to Blake or Harold. And so it's just too early to really say. I don't know if we're really going to know until kickoff against USC. It's not like they're going to show a whole lot of exotic things during the spring game or anything like that. Maybe we'll start to get a better sense, over the rest of spring practice and into preseason camp. But don't be surprised, listeners out there, if you don't really know going in to the season. Because like we said, the one thing that is encouraging is just how hands-on Blake has been with Harold and with those other linebackers. I mean, he's the linebackers coach in addition to being the defensive coordinator. But part of the reason for optimism with Harold moving back to the inside linebacker position that might work this time is Blake Baker's coaching. We've seen Blake with his cleats on, which is a little funny thing about him. He wears cleats out to practice. Is, again, really just hands-on with Harold, working with him on a lot of different technique stuff, trying to get him to really fully understand that inside linebacker position.
One other thing to touch on, the offensive line and the run game. The run game certainly, in your mind, looked pretty strong last weekend.
Yeah, we could do an entire podcast on the run game alone, and I'm sure at some point that we will, because it is completely different in so many ways. LSU, you saw it right off the bat in that practice last week, has really put a focus on the run game here because it's implementing some different styles and schemes to what it did last year. DJ Chester, got the chance to talk to him. He said it's not like this wasn't in the playbook, but it's not what they were drawing out of the playbook last year. And so now they're really harping on these new things that they're doing. You're seeing pulling tackles, which is a big part of this, is the athleticism that you get with Will Campbell and Emory Jones. LSU wants to highlight that. So they're getting those guys out on the edge in the perimeter, outside runs. We saw that. We saw tosses. We saw Garrett Nussmeier going under center and even doing some play action rollouts. Things that just LSU did not run the last couple of years is certainly now part of the offense, as we've talked about before, and as we'll continue to throughout this offseason, because it's a big piece of whether or not this team will be successful next year, is whether or not it can get more out of the run game in this way. And so it's obvious that it's going to be different. It's not like it's just off-season talk. Like, we're seeing it with our own eyes. This is different schematic stuff than they had in the last 2 years. And it is all building off of that offensive line and what they believe is going to be a real strength of this team. You would think so with 4 returning starters, and that's kind of what we've seen out of it so far.
Wilson, it's a beautiful day outside. I know the Braves are going to be playing here before long. Are you going to try to sneak in a chance to work on that short game we talked about?
Maybe if we get
the Braves are postponed. You got all day. Yeah, the Braves.
But hey, we still got some spring football work to do and all that, and then heading down with my wife's family to see them for the Easter holiday. So I don't think I'll be able to work on my short game today now, unfortunately.
I forgot about work and Easter. Man, that's tough. It's gonna cut into your golf game time. Koki, I'll offer my condolences in advance on the Red Sox season. I'm going to guess it's not going to be a vintage year, but we also are not going to feel very sorry for you because you've been loading up on rings, pretty much all 4 of your major sports up.
Oh no, you don't have to feel sorry for me, but it's speaking of teams that need pitching. Oh boy, the Red Sox could use some of the LSU starting pitchers. I'll just keep it at that. So
I want somebody to feel sorry for me because if I'm wearing an Expos hat, you know what kind of baseball I've been what kind of baseball I've not been enjoying for the past 20 years now since they hit the road. Brewers aren't the same in either. So, but not that anybody cares that much. I think everybody else would just as soon stop listening to us and get to some baseball too. But everybody, we appreciate you all tuning in. Of course, you know where to find us. We are here every Monday and Thursday on the LSU Sports Insider. We've got plenty to discuss as we go down the road. We'll be back to discuss, obviously, the LSU women's run and the NCAA tournament. Much more spring football to come. Obviously, much more baseball to come. We're almost at the halfway point now, the regular season, Koki, as I'm sure you know. So we've got a lot still on our plate, and we'll be here Monday and Thursday all the way through the end of the academic calendar year. So. Stick with us. Please go to theadvocate.com/subscribe to The Advocate or to subscribe to The Advocate and stay up to date on everything with our LSU newsletter. You can get a hold of that by going to theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. We are here, as I said, again, every Monday and Thursday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever other finer podcasts are found. And of course, perhaps more importantly, we are here on YouTube live every Monday and Thursday. If you don't catch us live on our YouTube channel, LSU Tigers and NOLA.com, you can catch us on that same YouTube channel after the fact. That's LSU Tigers on NOLA.com on YouTube. So please subscribe to that as well. And please check out our friends at Champion Wealth Strategies to find out more about them and all their services. You can go to championwealthstrategies.com and plan like a champion today. Gentlemen, I appreciate you hanging out with us for about an hour. We had a little technical difficulty to start up, but that's the way it goes. You figure out, you adapt, and overcome, and we are off and running. So, gentlemen, we do appreciate you. For Koki Riley up top there, for Wilson Alexander bringing up the rear, this is Perryn Keys. This has been the LSU Sports Insider.